Steel City Sports back here. Today we're going to be looking at the 9 teams that have already clinched playoff spots. And I'm just going to be giving my level of confidence for each of these teams. You know, I'm either cold, lukewarm, or hot on each of these teams. And we're going to make a separate video talking about the other wildcard spots that have not already been claimed. But let's get into the clinched teams. And for our first team, we have the San Francisco 49ers. I consider them to be red hot right now. They're 4-1 in their last 5 games with wins over the Eagles, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, the Commanders. Their only loss comes to the Baltimore Ravens, which is probably the best team in football. And they've already clinched the 1 seed in the NFC. I just think there's a lot of momentum for this team right now. Even though Brock Purdy, I think, played himself out of the MVP race in that game against Baltimore, you cannot deny the great season that he's had. He still leads in all kinds of quarterback stats. And we just, we know the tale with the Niners. We know how loaded they are. I think they're one of the most talented teams, not only this season, but of recent memory. This is one of the most talented rosters I could remember. And this kind of feels like the year that they could do it. Next team is the Philadelphia Eagles, who are ice cold right now. They have a putrid 1-4 record in their last 5 games. They've only beaten the Giants in their last 5 games. They have losses against the Niners, which was a big one, obviously, for the 1 seed. They lost to Dallas, another big team in the 1 seed race. And they had a pretty ugly win against the Cardinals this past week. And obviously, they lost to Seattle as well. So I think things are trending in the completely wrong direction for the Philadelphia Eagles. There was a point where they were 10-2, and they were my favorite to win the Super Bowl. I think that down the stretch, as their offenses become a little more predictable, I think you're starting to see the limitations of Nick Sirianni. And going into this year, that was kind of my biggest worry for the Eagles, was losing Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator, who was calling the plays last year that led them to the Super Bowl. Losing that guy was my biggest fear for this team. And I think as the year has gone on and Nick Sirianni's offense now is much more predictable, you're seeing the team kind of start to unravel. They're a much more predictable team this year than they were this past year. And my confidence for them has completely plummeted. Also to mention, their defense is like falling off a cliff. One of the big reasons why they were so dominant last year is their defense was really good on top of the potent offense. Well, this year, their defense ranks 23rd in terms of yards allowed. You look at the star players on this team. They went out and grabbed a Kevin Byard to go along with the other, the corners in their secondary that were really good last year. Darius Slay and James Bradbury. Big reason why they got to the Super Bowl is those guys were playing at a high level last year. Well, that's not the case this year. Those guys, I think, have definitely lost a step. The pass rush, I don't know exactly what's going on, but it's just not quite as potent. So I am definitely worried about this team going into the playoffs. Our next team is the Detroit Lions, and you cannot deny how great they've been this year. This is probably the best year in their franchise. Since 1994, I think, was the last time they made the playoffs. Well, finally winning the division. Whatever the Lions do go on to do in the playoffs, even if they lose their first playoff game, this season was a massive success in terms of turning the culture around. However, when you talk about my confidence level, it's pretty lukewarm with the Lions. They're 3-2 in their last 5. They have wins over the Saints, the Broncos, the Vikings. They have a couple of losses to the Bears and particularly the Cowboys. We talked about that crazy game, that insane ending where at first I liked the call by Dan Campbell to go for it, to be that bold. But after the penalty happens, you get thrown back to the 7 or 8 yard line. To go for it again, I think was, quite frankly, for lack of a better word, just stupid. I think that was a really stupid call by Dan Campbell to do that. Just go to overtime. But the team as a whole, Jared Goff has kind of shown in these big games why Sean McVay passed on him, because he was not good in that Cowboys game. He had 2 really bad picks in that. Their defense, I think, kind of gets exposed, especially by teams that have big arm quarterbacks, because their secondary, I know that they went out and spent some money in free agency, grabbing Cam Sutton, grabbing Gardner Johnson from the Eagles, but it hasn't really translated because their secondary is still really bad. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson, a couple other guys, their defense is still not very good. And so if Jared Goff has an off night, I think the Lions are kind of screwed. I think their destiny in the playoffs, I think, is extremely determined by who they match up against. So that's why I have them at lukewarm. Our next team is the Dallas Cowboys, who, if they would have lost that game to the Lions, I probably would have put them in lukewarm. However, they got that win. You can say whatever you want about how it ended. I made a video about it, but they did get the win regardless. So they are 3-2 in their last 5 games with wins over the Seahawks. The Eagles obviously was a big one. Then, like we just said, the Lions. Their L's, though, are what kind of concerned me as to why I was maybe considering them for lukewarm, is because they lost to 2 playoff teams with the Bills and the Dolphins. But I'm going to leave them in hot for now just because I think that they are hitting momentum at the right time. Dak Prescott, I think, has definitely improved in terms of how he's played in the big games. Now, don't get me wrong, he hasn't played well in all of the big games. You go back to Week 5 against the Niners was an atrocity. The Miami game, he didn't look particularly well in my opinion, but in the Eagle games, I think he looked really good. He looked good, obviously, against the Lions. And then, of course, CeeDee Lamb, and I said this again in that other video, I think he is making a case for the best receiver in the NFL. I would probably put Tyreek Hill at number 1. But if you put CeeDee Lamb as the second best receiver in football, you're going to get no arguments from me. That guy is an absolute effing freak. That guy is insane. And then their defense, of course, which I think is definitely overrated. I think has been kind of exposed by the better teams. But whenever they match up against lesser teams with less talent, they really, really are able to just beat the shit out of them. And then whenever they get rolling, they start playing downhill. That's when the Cowboys look really good. Is when their defense makes a statement. It allows Dak to play a little more freely. And again, similar to what we said about the Lions, I think Dallas, their destiny really just depends on who they end up playing. So you can maybe argue they should be in lukewarm, but I'm going to leave them in hot just considering they beat the Lions in a pretty big game. Next team is the Los Angeles Rams, one of the most surprising teams of the season. Go check out my video on the most surprising teams. They're obviously in that. They're red hot, I think, going into the playoffs. They're 4-1 in their last 5 games. With wins over the Browns. We know how great their defense is. The Commanders, the Saints, and the Giants. Their only loss was to the Ravens in their last 5, and they've had a very, very competitive game with the Ravens that went into overtime. I think you got to give a lot of credit to Sean McVay. I think if it wasn't for some of the other cases, I think that there are definitely stronger cases for Coach of the Year. But Sean McVay, I mean, you just got to highlight how great he has been for this team. And also their drafting this year was incredible, getting those 2 studs, in specific Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, 2 just offensive juggernauts to land for the LA Rams, to go with Matthew Stafford, to go with Cooper Kupp. And of course, defensively, you still have Aaron Donald, who I think has probably exited his prime now, but he's still a productive, high-end NFL player. So the Rams, I think they just check a lot of boxes. You know, their quarterback's playing really good. They have, I think, a top 3 head coach in the NFL to go along with dynamic offensive weapons. And I wouldn't be too surprised if the Rams won a playoff game. And for our next team is the Baltimore Ravens, who are scorching hot going into the playoffs, sitting at 5-0 in their last 5 games, 13-3. They've clinched the top seed in the AFC. And as much as this pains me to say as a Steelers fan, I think they're the favorite to win the Super Bowl as of right now. You look at how their defense is playing. They have the 4th-ranked defense in the NFL. Lamar Jackson is going to win the MVP this year. Just look at the teams that they've beaten in their last 5. I mean, you have wins over the Dolphins, many considered to be, you know, another team in that 1-seed race. They absolutely just pulverized the Dolphins 56-19 in one of the most disgraceful performances of the season. You also obviously have that massive win over the 49ers, where I think Lamar really stamped himself as the MVP. They have a win over Jacksonville, who's another team that could potentially be a wild card spot. A win over the Rams, who we just talked about, and then the Chargers. So they're just, I think that they are the most complete team. Lamar Jackson's playing the best football of his career. This is the best well-rounded defense, I think, in the NFL, even better than Cleveland whenever they're at full health. Yeah, like I said, I think they are currently the favorite to win the Super Bowl. This team is the Miami Dolphins. I have them in cold. You know, they're 3-2 in their last 5, so you can maybe argue lukewarm. They have wins over the Commanders, the Jets, and of course Dallas, the biggest win of the season, I think, for them. But their L's, we just talked about that embarrassment with the Ravens. I think that was just an atrocity. And then, of course, the Titans, another massively embarrassing game where I can't remember the specifics of it, but they had some 2-touchdown lead with only I want to say it was 2 minutes left. Go ahead and correct me in the comments on that one. But the reason why I have them cold, 3 major reasons. Number 1, of course, that performance like the Ravens we just said. Number 2 is Tyreek Hill has been banged up the past couple of weeks. That definitely worries me. If Tyreek Hill is not playing at 100%, the Miami Dolphins, I think that's trouble. Even though they had success without him, in that game against the Jets where Jalen Waddle and Tua had a very good connection. However, they're not going to be playing a team like the New York Jets in the playoffs. And then my last one that really concerns me, their best pass rusher, Bradley Chubb, is out for the season. That is a massive loss on top of already losing Jalen Phillips earlier in the season. So I'm worried about the Dolphins. I really am, especially depending on who they match up against. I think it could be really ugly for the Dolphins. And it is a shame because I've been one of the biggest supporter of the Dolphins this year, but they're kind of falling apart at the worst time. Next up is the Cleveland Browns. I do consider them hot. They're 11-5 on the season, 4-1 in their last 5 games with wins over Jacksonville, Chicago, Houston, the Jets. Their only loss coming against the Rams. And my biggest vote of confidence for them is Joe Flacco. He's looked incredible, really flexing that arm he has. He always had a cannon of an arm, and Joe Flacco is just known for his playoff performances. That is what made Joe Flacco's career with the Ravens. The regular season, he was always kind of, I would say, mediocre, maybe like slightly above average, but nothing crazy. But the postseason, I don't know what it is, but it's really where Joe Flacco really elevated his game. In their Super Bowl run, he beat Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Of course, one of the most all-time impressive runs to the Super Bowl. So having that guy at the helm and the way he's playing right now, I think it is incredible. And then, of course, you also have the top-rated defense in the NFL in terms of yards allowed. Myles Garrett, as much as I disagree with it, is probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I could make a separate video on that. That's another discussion for another day. But he's probably going to win that award. They're the top-rated defense. Flacco playing as he is. Stefanski, I think, should win Coach of the Year for the fact that he's got them at 11 wins with the carousel he's had at the quarterback position, and losing Deshaun and losing Chubb and still having 11 wins. They've had an extremely impressive year, and I think they're just really hot going into the playoffs. And last, but certainly not least, the reigning Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. I'm actually lukewarm on them going into the playoffs because their last 5 games, they're 2-3, and their wins are not impressive at all. The putrid Patriots and the Jake Browning Bengals, their losses come against the Packers, the Bills, and the Raiders. We've never seen the Chiefs look this bad on offense in the Mahomes era. We're used to them just blowing people out. Their offense has definitely lost a step, and it's weird because last year you thought that would have been the year that they lost a step, losing a guy like Tyreek Hill, but they won the Super Bowl. But I think the biggest thing definitely needs its own video is Travis Kelce has definitely exited his prime very, very quickly. People forget he's the same age as Rob Gronkowski. And he might even retire after this year. He said that his retirement is going to come sooner than people expect. You also, again, another video we probably have to make is the Eric Bieniemy impact, because losing him, I think, is also another reason this offense doesn't look quite as good. The only real saving grace outside of Mahomes just, pulling one out of his ass is the defense. The defense has been incredible this year. They're the second-rated defense in the NFL in terms of yards allowed per game. So you have that going. You have Mahomes and Reed still. They could just go off in any given game. So I'm not writing them off. I'm not going to say they're cold. I feel kind of lukewarm. But that's been my rankings, my level of confidence for each of the teams that have already clinched the playoffs. Like I said, we're going to do a separate video about the remaining wild card spots. But let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments. Thanks for listening.